Good afternoon, and welcome to the South Carolina edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics, and you can see here what the agenda is for our hour together. First logistic, everyone has been muted, so don't worry about any background noise on your end. Second, if you would like to make a question, to ask a question or make a comment, we will be leaving some time at the end of the webinar for questions. To ask a question, you have to go to the control panel on your right-hand side. At the top of that control panel, you see an orange arrow. If you click on that arrow, it shortens, it squeezes and opens back up the control panel. So if it is shrunk, just click on that little arrow and it'll expand it again. In that control panel, you see a section where it says questions. Click on that little box on the far right-hand side. There's an X next to it. If you click on that box, it pops the questions piece out and allows you to type in a question, and we'll get to it again at the end. In that same control panel, you see a handout section. If you click on that and expand that, it will give you access to the full Farms Under Threat 2040 report, as well as the South Carolina state summary that we will be talking about in a few minutes. Lastly, if when we get to the website and we're looking at the maps and the control panel is in your way, feel free to use that orange arrow to shrink the control panel so you can see the maps. Lastly, we will be recording this webinar and you will be receiving a link to the recording. Please feel free to share that far and wide, as we hope that this will be useful information for many folks who you work with. So let me now introduce myself and my co-host. I am Chris Coffin. I direct our National Agricultural Land Network. That's an information and peer learning network for professionals and community advocates who are looking to save farm and ranch land. I am also AFT's Senior Policy Advisor. I specialize in farmland protection, land access, and farm viability policy at the state and federal level. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Director of Special Program Development and Senior Advisor. Billy is a licensed landscape architect. Billy has been working on land use and farmland protection for over 25 years. Thank you, Billy, for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you in a minute, but let me take a minute to talk about American Farmland Trust for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are also the only national agricultural land trust. Some know us best by our bumper sticker, which you see there, No Farms, No Food. But the bumper sticker that we had before this one said, it's not farmland without farmers. We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. What does that mean? It means that our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but on the practices used on the land, as well as on the farmers and ranchers who work the land, both those who are on there now and those who will be in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy, advocacy, and analysis. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress, with 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Now back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Billy. So now let's dive into the methodology and findings from the report. The first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward, using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. So we started with the State of the States analysis of agricultural land conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types: urban and highly developed land and low density residential development. So let's take a minute to talk through that spectrum of development. Urban and highly developed land is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion, and it's been mapped and tracked for many years. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also, though, includes rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Basically anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit, and AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to match and quantify the impact of this type of development on the agricultural land base. We found that low-density residential areas range from lower density subdivisions to farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can occur in these low-density residential areas, and in fact, smaller farm parcels, particularly closer to urban areas, can be very productive and very profitable. However, our research has shown that once land has been converted to low-density residential development, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land. So starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with the business as usual scenario. Basically, we made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we had documented in that period from 2001 to 2016. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth. Building off that business as usual scenario, we developed two additional scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had that projection of conversion and the flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios. And we did that looking at both the type of agricultural land that would be converted, so whether it was cropland or pasture land, or in some cases woodland associated with farms, as well as on the quality of the land that was likely to be converted. As with any modeling exercise, there's some caveats. Most important, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local and there's no national database of them. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely, based on those conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and the potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or salinization. Mapping this impact involves a complex interplay of many variables and was simply beyond the scope of this analysis. You'll see in the web app, though, that we do include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios that we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that's taking that 2001 to 2016 conversion rate and projecting it out to 2040. The second scenario is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse. And we know this is possible because we know that high housing costs in more urban areas and more remote work opportunities, which are only likely to be improved as rural broadband improves, allows for additional sprawl. Some parts of the country may in fact already be on this trajectory. And then lastly, we modeled the future that we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive agricultural land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some farmland, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So quickly, let's just look at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. So you see here before the business as usual, that was the historic rate of conversion projected into the future. We adjusted for future population growth only for urban and highly developed land because we know that there's a strong correlation between those two. Runaway sprawl, again, we left that same rate of conversion as under business as usual, but we projected a much higher amount of low density residential conversion, 50% higher. Conversely, in the better built cities, you see that we are envisioning more dense development, so less conversion to urban and highly developed land, 25% less. And again, we took a more aggressive approach on the low density residential conversion that it could, in our view, be further reduced to 50% lower than what business as usual suggested. So those are the assumptions we used. This next chart shows each scenario's potential impact. On the left, you see the gray bars that show that between 2001 and 2016, we converted 11 million acres of agricultural land in this country in the first 16 years of this century alone. Under our projections, under business as usual or worse runaway sprawl, we may see another 18.4 million to 24.4 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. In comparison, the entire state of South Carolina is 20.5 million acres. So think about that this means, in fact, the loss of amount of land equivalent to losing all of the land in South Carolina. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, we can reduce the conversion of farm and range land to 11 million acres. So you may think 11 million acres, is that really the best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development is necessary, including renewable energy development, and that the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their development, and we hope they can be, we chose what we believed to be a realistic option. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how South Carolina compares to other states. This first slide shows the projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or rust, the more total acres likely to be converted. And given the size and scale of agriculture there in the southwest part of the country, it's not surprising that those are a very deep, dark color. This next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that's projected to be developed. And so here you see a different pattern reflecting, in fact, smaller total acreages and significant conversion. So let's go to the next finding, which relates to the impact on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called the PVR index. Land over a certain PVR threshold was, in our book, is considered nationally significant land, which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in certain parts of the country, every state has some nationally significant land, as you can see from the map in the green here in South Carolina. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion out to 2040 will occur on this land, even though it represents less than 40% of all farmland. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put the potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to all fruit, nut, and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. And I'm now going to turn it over to Billy to talk through these last couple of findings.
Thanks, Chris. The last national finding we want to highlight relates to coastal flooding as a result of projected sea level rise. We mapped what this might look like in 2040 based on 7.5 inches of additional sea level rise. We found that 450,000 acres of farmland and ranch land could be flooded by 2040, including 800 acres in South Carolina. This number does not include the salinization of soils and groundwater, which will jeopardize many more acres, even before the land is inundated. Additionally, we found that nearly 500,000 acres of existing urban high density and low density residential land will be flooded nationally, causing some residents to seek more stable housing inland. The result is another 2.7 million acres of ag land nationally that could be converted to development. And so I'd like for us to talk a little bit more about one of the other threats we are highlighting with this report. And that threat is from the threat of solar development on agricultural land. And it's something that AFT wants to be clear about. American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map shows the projected acres of utility scale solar photovoltaics energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the United States Department of Energy's Solar Future Study. That study estimates that the need will be 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet the Biden administration's energy goal. We did model conversion of land to solar development. That data is not included here, but information about solar modeling results is in our solar technical paper that is available through our Farmland Information Center. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important findings were that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. We're now going to dive into the data available for South Carolina on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Fraser, who will be our navigator. Thank you, Beth.
Great, thank you, Billy. And Billy, I think now we should both turn off our cameras so that the maps can be seen at a higher level. So When you first get to the website, and Beth will put in a link to the website during the webinar, you will see this handy overview. Again, it talks a little bit about what we did, what we found, what you can do. To get out of it, you simply click on the X on the upper right-hand side right there. That takes you to the maps. If you want that little summary back, you go up to the right-hand upper corner of the website, and it comes right back if you click on About. Let's focus up there on the upper right-hand corner for a minute, if we will. So next to the How-To tab, you see a View Report tab. That takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where you can find the full report, the executive summary, and a host of other information, including that solar technical report and other past reports under Farms Under Threat. You'll also see a How-To tab. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. And speaking of the data layers, we are making those data layers available to anybody who wants them. If you would like them, there is a Request Data tab up there on the right-hand side where you can learn more about what is available and how to make a request. So now we're going to zoom in to South Carolina. All you do is when you zoom in, you click on the state, and up pops this information down right below it. And you see the information for the state on the left-hand side, and the county that comes up on the right is wherever your cursor happened to be when you clicked on the state. So let's talk about these numbers for a minute. You see that for each scenario, you see the projected agricultural land loss. So for business as usual, for South Carolina as a state, it's 436,000 acres that our modeling is projecting will be converted. You can see that it's split between the dark rust color, which is the urban and highly developed land projection, and on the right part of the graph is the lighter orange color, and that is the low density residential development. So you can see for South Carolina as a whole, for the whole state, most of that conversion is likely to be low density residential. When you look here on the right at Richland County, that is a little bit different in terms of the split, that is more likely to be or as likely to be urban and highly developed land conversion as it is to be low density residential. If you go on down and look at what else you can learn on this page, it talks about, as I was talking about earlier, the acres of South Carolina's best agricultural land. Again, that's land that has that high PVR index that I talked about. You can see that a large part of the business as usual, that 222,000 acres, so a good half of the land that's likely to be converted in South Carolina is on the highest quality land in the state. And that number gets even higher when you go into runaway sprawl. If you keep looking down, again, this shows you the type of land that is likely to be converted. And here you see that it's pretty even, but that more of it is likely to be cropland, followed by pasture land and then woodland. And let me just make a point about the woodland number. This is not all forest land. What we're talking here is woods that are associated with a farm. We came up with an approach in our modeling in the State of the States report in 2020 that was able to project woods associated with a farm unit and look at the conversion of that woodland. So that's what we're talking about in terms of that number. When you look down below, again, the point that we made earlier, that low density residential development paves the way for further development. When we did our projections out to 2040 in South Carolina, it shows that land that becomes low density residential, or was that in 2016, is 5 times more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land by 2040. So let's go up for a minute, Beth, and look at the state summary, which you all can find by clicking on this download report right there. If you do that, it takes you to what is also in the chat that you can download right now. It is this two-pager that we hope will be useful for you all in using this as an educational tool with folks who you are speaking with, whether that is state policymakers, whether that is county officials, whether those are members of your organization or friends and family. From here, you can not only see the sort of trends in this 436,000 acres of potential conversion, but we also took that likely conversion and looked at what that impact would be on the industry of agriculture in South Carolina. And so our projections show that that translates into the potential loss of 3,600 farms, 239 million in lost farm output, and nearly 6,000 jobs related to agriculture. These were all numbers that were derived from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. When we look here, then we also include the top 3 hardest hit counties. These are the counties where the conversion is most pronounced. And Billy and Beth are going to zoom us into those in just a minute. Let me just show you that on the second page of this state summary, there is more information, again, the way that the breakdown occurs between low density residential and urban and high density development, that 5 times more likely. And again, looking there in the green, is that what could be different if South Carolina focused more on trying to reduce the conversion of land and to minimize the impact on its most productive farmland. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Billy and Beth to take us into some more of the maps.
Thanks, Chris. Beth and I are going to work together now as we use this very interesting tool to start on the coast. We're going to start down around Charleston. And Beth, if you could zoom in, please. And so in Charleston County, I just want to make sure everyone is familiar with the legend. Beth, could you highlight the legend for our folks on the webinar? Okay. So you see that projected urban and highly developed is the red, and the orange is LDR, low density. The 2 gray colors are existing urban and low density. Our most productive farmland is the green, and then as follows. So you can see Charleston County has 3 scenarios listed there. So Beth, if you could select the runaway sprawl scenario for Charleston County. Okay, so you see all of the orange and red going out, projecting out from the existing urbanized area, and it is significant. The runaway sprawl is 3,500 acres in what is a very constricted landmass area. And then, Beth, if you could highlight our better built cities, you see that that conversion rate is actually significantly less than half of the development. So when we were talking about the sea level rise earlier, I think the illustration of Charleston County and the other counties that adjoin it all up and down the coast is that the more sea level rise that you have, the more inland migration that you're going to have, putting your most productive, versatile, and resilient lands, and quite frankly, your forested lands under the greatest pressure. So this phenomenon is not unique to South Carolina. It's happening in all the coastal states, some more than others. So it's a sort of a double whammy, if you will, with the conversion of farmland for urban uses and the conversion of farmland because of sea level rise. And if we could go northwest up the state, Beth, up to Spartanburg, the city of Spartanburg. If we could go, here we go. If we go up the northwest corner of the state, and I think that as we go up here, we can see another. You can see all these cities. They start growing together. So you can see Spartanburg that Beth has highlighted for us with the runaway sprawl and the Beth, if we could kind of highlight that, the runaway sprawl in this case, and then the better built cities. So you can see it's significantly less. And you can zoom out a little bit, Beth, please. And you can see that it's about half of the land converted. But what you're seeing is along these corridors, for example, the 85 corridor, where you're looking at Gaffney and Spartanburg and Greenville, all of these cities and metro areas begin to merge together. So the better built cities, you can see a lot more green on that map, just to simplify that. If you compare those two, it's clear the difference that better built cities makes. And from a fiscal standpoint, from a budget standpoint, American Farmland Trust has done over 80 cost of community services studies across the nation. And generally, they all say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and agriculture uses less in services than it pays in taxes. So building in a compact, contiguous way with smart growth has a better long-term fiscal impact for the community. And that's really what we wanted to highlight here today with our map overview. And now back to you, Chris.
Great. Thanks so much, Billy. Thanks so much, Beth. That was super helpful. So now that we've talked about the findings, we just want to take a few minutes to talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you were a county or a municipal official or a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope that you will find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you are a farmer, a rancher, a landowner, work for a nonprofit, or a community advocate of some kind, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let me just highlight a few of the things we discuss in the recommendations. So under encourage smart growth, county comprehensive plans are critically important in steering development, and Billy is going to talk more about some of the elements of that planning that can help to reduce farmland conversion and encourage compact development. We encourage counties to have comprehensive plans and folks to get involved in that planning process. We also encourage states to provide support for these county planning efforts. Protecting ag land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers. More funding for that program would help protect more farmland in South Carolina. Advance smart solar siting. Local governments can ensure that best practices are followed when siting solar on farmland. This includes best practices around the construction of development, around the operation of solar development projects, and the decommissioning of them, all to preserve soil health, to preserve water resources, and the ability for a farmer to farm the land during and after the life of the project. States can invest in additional research around agrivoltaics or dual-use solar and provide incentives for dual-use solar development. We have a wealth of resources around smart solar siting on the Farmland Information Center website, and we've included a link to that website in the chat. And lastly, supporting farmland access. State and local governments can develop their own or help to fund farm link programs led by nonprofits or extension services. These are programs that work with both farmers and landowners who are looking for a successor or perhaps someone to lease their land, and with farm seekers who are looking for land to lease or buy to farm. This technical assistance can be really valuable in helping to keep farmland in farming. So now Billy's going to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture and smart growth strategies.
Thanks, Chris. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, American Farmland Trust encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. This involves these 4 basic principles. Principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information website, and we hope that you'll check them out. These tools that you see here, inventorying resources throughout the rural areas, be it your best soils, your blue line streams, your aquifers, your historic and cultural resources, scenic view sheds, and then engaging farmers and ranchers throughout the planning process, asking them how they feel and what they feel they need to protect enough land for the future of agriculture in that community for all forms of agriculture, and then incorporating agriculture into community plans, into comprehensive plans if you have comprehensive planning. It's so important that that element is there. And then implementing tools to retain and protect agricultural land. And on the bottom right of this slide, you'll note that's a graphic from our cost of community services studies that you'll find on the Farmland Information Center website. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so some smart growth strategies. This is not prescriptive, but these are best practices that have been successful around the nation. Tools such as urban growth boundaries, agricultural zoning in your rural areas, large minimum lot sizes in rural agricultural areas, and this goes directly to the low density residential development that Chris was speaking about earlier, having a viable agricultural unit that is not just an estate lot. Farmland protection programs. This could be at the state or local government levels, and then private land trusts are critically important. And there are wonderful private land trusts that are operating very successfully across South Carolina. And we would encourage farm owners to contact their local land trust about conserving their land and consider placing a conservation easement on their land that is held by one of the local land trusts there in South Carolina. And then having a goal for permanent farmland protection in your comprehensive plan, having a goal to work towards. What is the total number of acres necessary in your county to retain the existing agricultural operations, the agribusiness, the agritourism? What is that acreage? And that number will probably come from a very broad cross-section of the community that will include representatives from various sectors of agriculture, as well as your planning entities in these counties, and most likely from your local Convention and Visitors Bureau, because tourism is so tightly woven with the rural landscape. And so I believe we have time to stop and take a few questions. Chris, are there questions for us?
We have one. I encourage folks, if you have them, please, to feel free to put them in the chat. Again, just click on that little box to the right side of the questions where it pops it out and you can write them in. But here's one, which is a little bit, can you talk a little bit more about smart growth at the county level, and particularly how do you make the case for smart growth?
Okay, the case for smart growth. It depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a conservationist, that's going to be a pretty easy case to make. If you're talking to an elected official who may not be as engaged in the rural area and is perhaps representing an urban district and not a rural district, it all boils down to the planning in a conservative way as it relates to your city or county budget. Sprawl simply uses more in services than it pays in taxes. That's one critical element of making the case for smart growth. The other is urban areas and rural areas go hand in glove. Rural areas give urban areas their context. And the more communities grow in these compact, contiguous ways, the more vibrant your downtowns become, the more focus there is on having a variety of housing, having walkable, bikeable communities, having more public spaces available for citizens. The list goes on, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I also think that having a vibrant urban core is one way that cities compete with their peers across the nation. As we've seen over the last, I would say the last 10 to 20 years, people are choosing place first and jobs second. So cities are focused on making their urban areas vibrant with culture and, history and architecture and public spaces that their citizens can engage with, but also the opportunity to go out into agricultural areas or natural areas with trails or just engaging in the environment. I think those two things go hand in glove, and having a comprehensive plan that incorporates all land uses. So I think the takeaway here is we're planning as intentionally for the rural area as we plan for the urban area.
Great. That is, I like that last point, particularly about that intentionality. So we have one more question, Billy, and I'm going to pose it to you. I have thoughts as well, but giving you, and I have to say, I love these kinds of questions. So the question is, do you all have staff capacity to speak at events, provide technical assistance, or provide follow-up from this session for folks working in this space in South Carolina?
Yes, we do. As someone who covers the Southeast and Texas, I have spent a lot of time in South Carolina. We work with several partner organizations across the state and the Department of Agriculture. I have already been in South Carolina no less than 5 times this calendar year, and I am going to be going back at least 3 more times before the end of the year. Several counties have already reached out to us about using this data and having county level projects to drive the comprehensive planning process with information that projects out into the future to give policymakers and decision makers the best information they can have as they plan for the future of these communities. So you'll be hearing more from American Farmland Trust in South Carolina. Just on a related note, we have several board members and President's Council members that are based in South Carolina. And we have been closely tied to that state for decades. And just on a personal level, I think it's just a beautiful state in every way.
Great, thank you, Billy. And that was a perfect segue on that question to make a plug for the National Agricultural Land Network, which we created in 2020. Let me say before I just talk about that, to say, Billy, we have put your email address into the chat, so folks who would like to follow up directly with Billy can do that. My email is here as well under the National Agricultural Land Network. And let me say, Billy is absolutely the first line of contact for in-depth discussions around South Carolina. But we encourage anybody who's working in this space to also join the National Agricultural Land Network. The intent with that network is to have a community of folks who are learning from each other about what is working, both in terms of planning and zoning and in terms of permanent farmland protection and everything in between. That can be thinking about other state policies or county policies that are helping to save land, whether that's agricultural districts or agricultural use assessments and other tax policy. So we welcome folks joining the network. It is free. We encourage folks to do so. We have regional programming. We have national webinars. We are going to continue and increase the number of webinars over the next year that are focused on planning and zoning. So we hope that you will join the network. Again, it's free. And let me just note two other resources you see here. The Farmland Information Center. We've talked about that a little bit in terms of that's where you can find a lot of our work around smart solar siting. That also has a Ask an Expert feature. So if you were looking for any particular data, whether that is around South Carolina or around the nation as a whole, or examples of county comprehensive plans that address agriculture, there are a wonderful wealth of resources with the Farmland Information Center. And I would be negligent to not say that AFT's own website, these are obviously both AFT entities, but farmland.org, which is AFT's main website, also has a lot of information about work we are doing around the country. So with that, Billy, let me turn it back to you to close us out this afternoon.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everyone who's on the call today. And you know, in addition, we've shared a lot of information today. We've shared our websites, but just know that American Farmland Trust is working across agriculture holistically across the nation in all the regions that Chris mentioned earlier, working on federal policy, state policy, regenerative agriculture, climate, water quality, soil health, farm bill, women in agriculture, next generation farmers. There's a big mission, but we have about 1 billion acres of farmland in this country. And American Farmland Trust is a small but very nimble organization. And we're in our 41st year of operation with about 150 employees nationwide, about half of which work remotely. So we're building specific to South Carolina and the Southeast. We have built a very strong team in the Southeast that is, as we said earlier, approaching these states in a very intentional way. I am just one member of that team, but you can read more about our other staff in the Southeast on our website at farmland.org. I encourage you to contact anyone at AFT if you have general questions, or if you have questions about the Southeast or South Carolina specifically. Please reach out to me, and hope to engage with you in this important work in the future. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.